Level 1. The Backyard Novice. You're 16 years old, and the truck is a 1998 Jeep Cherokee XJ you bought for €900 from a guy who said it just needs a battery. It needed a battery, a fuel pump, a driver's side window that doesn't roll up all the way, and a heater core that leaks coolant onto the passenger floor mat whenever you turn the defrost on. To everyone else, it's a rust bucket with 260,000 kilometers on the clock. To you, it's the only thing you've ever owned outright. Your backyard isn't a trail. It's a sloped patch of dirt behind your parents' house with a drainage ditch you've decided is a technical section. You air down the tires with a pressure gauge you got for Christmas and no real idea what number you're aiming for. You guessed 20 psi because a forum post said something close to that. It's not exactly right, but it's close enough to feel the difference. The tire sidewalls bulge slightly. The ride softens. The truck starts hunting for grip instead of bouncing off it. You drop the transfer case into 4 low for the first time, and the whole truck groans like it's waking up from a nap it didn't want to end. You get stuck in the ditch within 4 minutes. Not dramatically stuck, just enough that the tires spin and throw mud on a window you can't roll up anyway. You have no winch, no recovery boards, no strap. You have a garden hoe and stubbornness. You dig out in front of the tires for 45 minutes. You wedge flat rocks under the front axle for traction. You rock the truck back and forth in first gear, forward, reverse, forward, until it finally claws its way out with a lurch that throws you against the seatbelt. You sit there with mud on your face, feeling like you just summited something. You didn't. You just got out of a ditch behind your house. But at 16, that's enough to make you order a $40 toe strap that night, along with a cheap tire pressure gauge that's slightly more accurate than the one you have, and start watching every trail video you can find at 1.5x speed until your parents tell you to turn the volume down. Over the next few months, the Cherokee becomes a low-budget experiment. You install a used set of 31-inch all-terrains from a guy on a classifieds app for €150, mismatched treadwear front to back, and you don't know yet that this matters for handling on wet rock. You don't have the money for real recovery gear, so your kit is a strap, a shovel, and a floor jack that isn't rated for the terrain you're using it on. You'll learn that the hard way eventually. For now, every weekend is the same loop. Get stuck, get unstuck, learn one small thing, repeat. Level 2. The Trail Day Tag-Along. You're 17. Someone from school mentions a Jeep club that meets on Saturdays and runs actual trails, not drainage ditches. You show up to the parking lot meetup with a truck that has one recovery point, no rock sliders, and tires that are already half worn from a summer of backyard abuse. The trail leader looks at your rig for a long moment before saying you'll be fine as long as you follow the line exactly. You don't know what the line means yet. You find out in the first mile when you take a bad line over a ledge and hear a sound from underneath your truck you will never forget. Metal on rock, a scrape that runs the length of the frame and into your spine like it's your own bone being dragged. You bent a skid plate. Not the end of the world, but it's your first real lesson in something nobody tells you at the dealership. Ground clearance is a number on a spec sheet, but line choice is a skill, and the skill matters infinitely more than the number. A guy named Pete, who's been running this club for 11 years in a built TJ Wrangler, walks over and doesn't ask if you're okay. He asks if you want to know what you did wrong. You say yes. He shows you how to read the obstacle before committing, where the high point of the rock is, where your differential sits relative to it, how a 2-inch shift in tire placement changes everything. He talks about the difference between crawling with momentum and crawling with throttle, and why the second one destroys drivetrains. You spend the rest of the day watching every truck ahead of you and mentally rehearsing lines before it's your turn. The group doesn't baby you. Someone walks you through the next obstacle step by step: tire placement, throttle control, when to let the truck idle over a ledge, and when to add just enough gas to keep momentum without spinning a tire and digging a hole. You learn more in that one Saturday than in 6 months of videos. You also learn the culture. Nobody offers to winch you out immediately. They talk you through recovering yourself first, spotting from outside the truck, giving hand signals, because that's the actual skill that they exist to build. By the end of the day, you've learned 3 new words: articulation, breakover angle, side hill, and used all 3 incorrectly at least once. Level 3. The first real trail. 19 years old and you drive 4 hours to run a trail with a reputation. The kind that shows up in every forum thread with gnarly attached to it. You've upgraded the Cherokee since the backyard days. New all-terrain tires bought as a match set this time. A winch you saved for over 8 months working weekends at a hardware store. And a rear locker you installed yourself in your parents' driveway over 2 weekends, cross-referencing 3 different tutorials because none of them matched your exact axle code stamped on the tag. The trail has a section everyone calls the stairs, a series of ledges that climb almost 2 meters over 20. You watch 3 other trucks clear it before your turn, studying the line each one takes, noting where the 4th truck spotter waved a hand to shift the driver 2 inches left. You attempt it and stall halfway up. Your truck settles at an angle that makes your stomach drop. Front tire hanging in open air, back tire clawing at loose shale that keeps sliding out from underneath it. This is the first time you use your winch in a real situation, not a demonstration in your driveway with the truck sitting flat on pavement. Your hands are shaking as you run the line to a tree anchor 20 meters ahead, wrap a tree saver strap around the trunk instead of the bare cable so you don't kill the tree, and clip in the winch hook the way you rehearsed a dozen times in videos, but never under this kind of pressure. The spotter outside your truck is calmly giving hand signals you'd only ever seen from a distance. The winch pulls the front end down onto the next ledge in a slow, controlled crawl. The truck settles. You breathe for what feels like the first time in 3 minutes. You clear the rest of the trail without incident, but that moment on the stairs changes something. You understand now that off-roading isn't about the truck. It's about 100 small decisions made under the kind of pressure that doesn't exist anywhere else in your life at 19. Decisions about throttle, about line, about trust in a spotter you met 4 hours ago and now owe your front bumper to. Level 4. The systematic builder. 22 years old and you've sold the Cherokee to a kid who reminds you of yourself 6 years earlier. Same nervous energy, same questions about which tire size is enough. You upgrade to a 2016 Toyota 4Runner with a solid front axle swap. And this time, every modification has a reason attached to it, not a trend copied from a forum thread. You upgrade the suspension because your old setup was maxed out on articulation, and the axle was binding on anything steeper than 30 degrees. The shocks topping out and transferring shock loads straight into the frame instead of absorbing them. You add front and rear lockers because an open differential wastes torque on whichever tire has the least resistance, which on rock is almost always the wrong tire. You've watched enough trucks spin one tire uselessly in the air while the other 3 sat planted and useless to understand this isn't optional anymore. You add rock sliders because you've watched 3 friends crack a rocker panel on a trail that looked easier than it was, and a €400 repair bill is not a story you want to tell twice. You upgrade the onboard air compressor because airing back up on the side of a mountain with a bicycle pump is a genuinely miserable way to spend 40 minutes. You start reading wheel and tire fitment charts the way other people read spreadsheets, backspacing, offset, bolt pattern, and you re-gear your axles from 3.73 to 4.56 because the bigger 35-inch tires were killing your low-end torque, and your transmission was hunting between 3rd and 4th gear on every moderate incline, a problem you didn't understand until a mechanic explained effective gear ratio to you on a whiteboard. This is the first time the truck feels like a system you actually understand, not a collection of parts you bought because a video told you to. You run a national forest trail solo for the first time. No group, no spotter, just you, a satellite communicator clipped to your chest strap, and a truck built the way you built it. It's the most self-reliant 6 hours of your life up to that point. And when you get a flat on a sharp piece of shale 40 minutes from the trailhead, you change it yourself,
torque the lug nuts by feel, and keep going without once considering turning back.
Level 5. The no name at the Trailhead. 25, and you have a reputation in the regional off-road community. Not famous, known. People recognize your truck at trailheads because of the deep front bumper you fabricated yourself out of half-inch plate steel after a shop quote came back at €2,400 for something you were fairly sure you could build for $600 in materials and a borrowed welder. You've started helping other people with recoveries, not professionally, just because you've gotten good at reading a stuck truck and figuring out the fastest, safe way to unstick it. A guy in your local group buries his Wrangler axle deep in mud after a storm on a trail that was bone dry the week before. You're the one who shows up with recovery boards, explains why yanking with a strap will only dig him deeper and risk snapping a recovery point clean off the frame, and talks him through a slow, controlled winch pull instead. Line tension building gradually. No jerking, no slack in the cable that could turn into a projectile if something fails. You post the recovery online, mostly as documentation, tagging the trail and the conditions for anyone planning to run it. It gets shared across 3 different regional off-road groups. 40-something messages roll in over the next week, some asking build questions, some asking about the fabricated bumper, one asking if you do recoveries for hire. You hadn't considered that as a real option until that message sat in your inbox for 2 days before you answered it. Level 6. The Trail Guide and Part-Time Builder. 28. And this is generating real income now, not a side hustle you're embarrassed to mention at dinner. You're running paid guided trail days on weekends, 12 truck convoys through terrain you've personally scouted and rated by difficulty class, with a pre-run briefing covering recovery points, radio channels, and a turnaround plan if anyone's build isn't up to the obstacle ahead. You're also doing small build jobs out of a 2-car garage, winch installs, locker installs, suspension upgrades for people who trust your judgment more than a big box shop's upsell menu. The guiding work teaches you something the building work never could. When it's your truck stuck on a ledge, you accept a certain amount of risk without thinking twice. When it's a client's truck with their kids buckled into the back seat, the standards change completely, immediately, and without negotiation. You start turning people away from obstacles that are technically within their truck's mechanical capability, but beyond their skill level, because the gap between those two things is exactly where accidents happen, and you've seen enough near misses to know the gap is wider than most people believe about themselves. You develop a reputation for saying no to things other guides say yes to. It costs you a few bookings from people who wanted the harder trail and went elsewhere to get it. It also means nobody who's run with you has ever needed an ambulance, and that record matters more than the extra €50 a booking would have brought in. Level 7. The Shop and the Competition Circuit. 32, and you've opened a proper shop. 2 bays, a 2-post lift, and a growing waitlist of builds that stretches out 6 weeks. You've also started competing. Entry-level rock crawling comps at first, then regional short course races once you build a dedicated buggy that exists for exactly one purpose and does nothing else well. A tube chassis rig with a solid axle front and rear, portal gears for extra ground clearance, and a fuel cell instead of a stock tank, because nothing about this build is stock anymore. Competition changes how you think about a build completely. On the trail, you're optimizing for reliability and comfort over hours of driving. On a course, you're optimizing for speed through obstacles that would take a trail truck 20 careful minutes, compressed into under 90 seconds, with a clock running and a crowd leaning over the fence. Your first competition run ends with a broken tie rod on the second obstacle, the steering suddenly going loose and useless in your hands at the worst possible moment on an off-camber climb. You DNF.
You spend the drive home replaying every decision, not devastated, just calculating. Was it the geometry, the material, the angle of impact against the rock? You rebuild the front end with a heavier tie rod, a steering stabilizer, and the redesigned mounting bracket for the next event. You place 9th out of 22. It's not a podium, but it's proof the changes worked, and you start keeping a build log for every race truck you touch from that point forward. Level 8, the King of the Hammers Qualifier. 36 years old, and you've qualified for a spot at one of the events every serious off-roader in the country talks about. A brutal combination of desert racing and technical rock crawling that breaks trucks and drivers in roughly equal measure. You've built the buggy for this specific race over 8 months, a purpose-built rig with long travel suspension, a full roll cage certified to the event's safety standard, a fire suppression system, and a fuel cell mounted behind a certified containment barrier, because nothing about this race tolerates a shortcut. Practice labs reveal a problem your simulations didn't catch, a bump steer issue in the steering geometry that only shows up at speed over whooped-out desert terrain, the front wheels darting unpredictably every time you hit a rhythm section above 60 kilometers an hour. You rebuild the front suspension geometry 2 weeks before the race, adjusting tie rod length and steering arm angle, testing under shop lights past midnight more nights that month than you can count, your crew chief handing you coffee at 1 a.m. without either of you saying much. Race day, you make it through the desert section clean, holding a pace you're proud of. The rock section breaks you a little. A boulder field that takes 90 minutes off your target time after a rear axle shaft snaps, and your co-driver has to help you swap it trailside with a portable jack and the spare you'd packed on a hunch. You finish. Not near the podium, 41st out of a field where more than half the trucks don't finish at all. You radio your pit crew as you cross the line, and your voice cracks in a way you didn't expect it to. Finishing King of the Hammers is a smaller club than winning most other races, and for the first time in years, that's enough.
Level 9, the Legacy. 41 years old. Your shop has trained 6 people who now run their own builds professionally, 2 of whom have their shops of their own in neighboring states. A buggy you built sits in a display at a regional off-road heritage event. Not a museum exactly, but close enough that it means something when strangers stop and read the placard with your shop's name on it. You still guide occasionally, though your knees complain about a full day of spotting the way they never used to, and your right shoulder aches in cold weather from a winch line that snapped back years ago and caught you before you could get clear. You still do the recoveries yourself when it's a serious one. Not all of them. The business needs you too much now. Invoices and supplier calls, and a waiting list that runs itself whether you're there or not. But the ones that matter, you stay close to. Because the moment you stop reading terrain with your own hands on the wheel, the instinct starts drifting from real to theoretical. And theoretical instinct on a rock ledge is a liability you refuse to carry, no matter how many people you've trained to think the way you think. Somewhere right now, a 16-year-old is stuck in a drainage ditch behind their parents' house with a truck that needed a battery and turned out to need everything else too. They're going to dig with a garden hoe. They're going to order a tow strap that night and a pressure gauge that's slightly more accurate than the one they have. They're going to get it wrong 100 times before they get it right once, and feel like they summited something the first time they claw their way out of a ditch that barely qualifies as an obstacle. They'll figure it out. Most do. Some of them will reach the level you reached. A few of them will go further, because they'll learn what you learned, but they'll also learn what you didn't. That's how it's supposed to work.